All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Liam McCullum Show. I have Clint Russell from Liberty Lockdown on the show, also known as Reed Coverdale's other half. It was good to see you guys down in Florida at RevCon. It was cool that
Yeah, that
Reed
was a
could
blast.
finally make it this time.
Yeah, I got to see my husband. It's always good to see him. Don't see him enough, to be honest. Especially now that he's banned off Twitter, it makes it very, we have group texts instead of group chats. It just doesn't feel the same.
Yeah, it was hilarious. The day of Liz Cheney's election, I put out a poll. I'm like, how many of you guess that Reed Coverdale, his Twitter account will still exist tomorrow after he reacts to it? And he did get banned the next day, but it was for violating their rule about like you can't make another account or something like that
Yeah,
if you've been
yeah,
banned.
ban evasion. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I wanted to bring you on to talk about ESG. I've been meaning to get you on for a while, but now that I'm out of the university system, I have a better idea of what my schedule's like. So figured I'd
hell yeah,
bring you
man.
on. And
Congrats again, dude. That's awesome.
yeah, thank you. And the more I'm out, like I just realized how much propaganda was around me and how oppressive that was. And thanks to James Lindsay and people like yourself, I was kind of aware of it and I was able to get through without being completely indoctrinated. So
Hey, that means a lot to me, man. If I played any part in keeping you inoculated, no pun intended, from the propaganda you were experiencing, that's awesome.
yeah, definitely help. Also just to have this community because like I became a libertarian my senior year of high school, so I was already aware of the principles, but to like actually meet people who were standing up to all of this nonsense, it was very helpful. And
Sure.
and people should listen to our earlier episode. I'll link to that in the description just so they can kind of uh, learn a little bit about how you became a libertarian and how you kind of woke up during the pandemic. I know you were a libertarian before that, but
Yeah.
you told your story and I'll link to that here. But today I wanted to talk about ESG. You and I are both listeners and supporters of Dave Smith, and
Big time.
something that he's been talking about for a while is kind of how after Occupy Wall Street, corporations started to use intersectionality, identity politics to kind of tear apart the Tea Party movement and the Occupy movement. And you no longer had like this 99% against the 1% anymore. You have all of these different groups just, vying for authority over each other. Um, and that was like a really great story. And I totally like, I believed it, but I never really understood the mechanism and what was
Yep.
behind it. And then people like yourself and James Lindsay started to explain ESG, and it's like, holy crap, we have all of
There's
the
the
moving
mechanism.
pieces now. Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you want to go ahead and just explain kind of how this started, what ESG is, and yeah, just have take the reins and take that wherever you want.
Sure. 2004, it was Kofi Annan who was the I don't know, whatever general of the UN at the time. In 2000, they had started this program. I haven't researched this in a little bit, so you're going to have to fill in some blanks if you want the actual verbiage of things. But 2000, they start this plan that's basically, the Green New Deal via the UN. And 2004, he comes out with this paper where they concoct. It's actually some college kid that writes it, but they push it as their own, and the idea is that we have to find a way to pair big business with government policy if we're going to alleviate the carbon emission crisis. That's the whole basis. That's the whole genesis of all of this. So kudos to Al Gore and his people. They successfully infiltrated the highest levels of governmental power, and via the UN, they implemented ESG, which is now the vast majority of investment capital that's being managed by the biggest hedge fund managers on the planet are doing so with the pretenses of ESG guidance. So E being environmental, S being social justice is what it really is, and then government or governance, it's just like how your boards make up. Oftentimes, it's equity quotas and things of that nature. So it didn't really catch fire until much later than when the Occupy Wall Street movement was undermined. But it was like its framework existed all the way back in 2004, 2005. So a long time now. Um, and I think it was, God, I can't remember exactly. Okay, so the way the ball starts to roll is Kofi Annan sends out this letter to the 50 biggest money managers and biggest big businesses on the planet, and he says, "Hey, this is our idea. What do you think?" And stunningly, Deutsche Bank and Goldman Sachs and all the biggest guys, they all respond positively and they say, "Yes, we're on board. This sounds great," which doesn't make a lot of sense. But when you realize that we now exist in a global fascistic model where big businesses have to have positive relationships with big government all over the world if you want to do business globally, it makes sense that they would say yes. I mean, what are they going to do? Say no, and then have uh, Goldman Sachs say yes and everybody else say no, in which case Goldman gets all the business? Like, no. So they all sign on. And then just progressively over the next 15 years, it starts to infiltrate the accounting practices, the ways in which um, the underwriters for investing at these biggest money managers are actually reading the financial paperwork of the businesses before they invest in them. Like it's actually there now. It also has infiltrated its way via social emotional learning into the public school system. There's a multitude of mechanisms by which this entire propagandistic push for what amounts to a global Green New Deal has taken hold. Oh, you're muted, man.
Yeah, just to break down the more about like that specific mechanism and what's driving this. What is the actual incentive behind it? What is the what is why does Vanguard, why does BlackRock and all of these money managers, why do they want to do this? Is it merely that the
Sure.
UN wrote this paper and they're merely following along with it, or is is it like
It's
this?
both.
Okay, and then there must be like some, is there force behind it, or is the Federal Reserve propping these things along?
Yeah,
What's happening there?
it's basically, this is why I've pled with the libertarians to be the vanguard of this defense, this movement, because we're the only ones that really understand this stuff, and this is why I continue to go on these shows and tours, just talking to people about this stuff, because I know that we are the best people to fight this, because we really get it at its base level, whereas Republicans, like, God bless them, they're not going to understand this fully. It's just the truth. So the primary mechanism for control is obviously access to central banks. So the Fed window is a huge one. If you don't have access to the Fed window as a money manager, you're basically DOA. Like you can't compete, because you're able to borrow money, at the overnight rate, which was at 0% for most of the past decade. Like if you don't have access to that, you're in serious trouble. So that gives you a huge competitive advantage. So you have to play ball. You can't be some outsider just going, I'm going to compete on my merit and, you know, damn the consequences. I'm gonna just stick to my principles. No, 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 no. You're managing billions and billions of dollars. Some of these guys manage trillions of dollars. Like, there's no way that you can actually, stand apart. BlackRock, for instance, has $10 trillion under management. They've lost a trillion this year because the market tanked, but they still have 9 trillion under management. It's crazy amounts of money that we're talking about here. So if you're managing that money and you're trying to make an outsized return, it's incumbent upon you, no matter what your beliefs are, to have a good relationship with the governments of the world. And the governments of the world are all on board with this, climate change insanity. And I think it's insane. And I can, probably we could discuss that further if you'd like, but it's really just an anti-human push. Anyways, so that's part of it. And then there's also the second prong of how this attack took place is that the academia has programmed many of these people into being true believers. There's many people out there, like the people that work in HR and hire and fire it within these corporations. They hold most of these beliefs themselves. That carbon is a crisis and that overpopulation is an issue and all this stuff. So it's not a you don't have to like coerce everybody. Not everybody is doing this just for financial benefit. Some of them genuinely believe they're saving the world. And what I want people to really understand is that for those people in particular, their perception is that we're under such grave threat right now because of climate change that if you have to sacrifice, say, 1 billion people to save the rest of us, it makes sense. That trade-off makes sense. I think their base philosophy is totally off base, because they're like what they're operating, the information they're operating off is flawed. So they're making an assessment, a risk assessment, which is fucked up, to put it bluntly. Um, but when you believe you're working for the greater good, and you believe that if you don't do this, 5 billion people die, well, then of course you're going to feel justified in doing whatever you have to do, including lying, cheating, stealing, coercing. So it makes sense to me. So it's both. It's some true believers, because so many people have been indoctrinated via academia, and then there's the obvious financial drivers that come from the fascistic business model that we now have to deal with.
Yeah, and you've talked about how this has kind of like driven this is the term I think it's like pink washing, where corporations like put flags, like pride flags in their bios or something like that.
Greenwashing. Yeah,
Greenwashing, that's right.
maybe for gay stuff, then it's called rainbow washing or something. But
Yeah.
greenwashing is where they lie about the stuff. I'll give you a great example. Core Civic is one of the biggest private prison conglomerates in America. They were getting a bunch of their ESG score was dropping because they had a bunch of reports about mistreating prisoners and things of that nature. And I shit you not, this is how they respond, and they increase their ESG score. They don't like make sure that no one gets beat up by the guards. They don't they don't lobby to get nonviolent offenders released from prison. No, no, no. They make sure two things. They make sure that their prison guards are diverse, because that'll change everything. And number two, they put a mural of Martin Luther King Jr. in the yard where the prisoners work out. That increases their ESG scores. Is that a meaningful reform? No. Does that actually assist the people that are in prison? No, it doesn't. It's just, it's just frills. It's building a statue. It's nothing. So that's greenwashing.
Yeah, and I heard that also Tesla has a low ESG score.
Yep.
And if you consider like electric vehicles to be like the saving thing that's coming down the road, like
Right.
you would think that they would have a high ESG score, even though that there are arguments that even electric vehicles,
Yeah,
increase carbon.
From their worldview, though, you would think Elon Musk and Tesla and basically everything he's doing would be the highest level ESG score because it's eliminating carbon. But the reality is ExxonMobil has a significantly higher ESG score than Tesla. And Tesla's is based off of their governance score because they don't focus on hiring based off of racial quotas and things like that. And Elon he's not favored by the elites. So it's just a fraud. I mean, it's just too transparently, it's a fraudulent metric. It benefits allies of the political class and it punishes the enemies of the political class. And that, my dear friends, is classic fascism. So that's what it is. And I really think that it's the biggest threat we face besides World War III. It really is. And I'm so grateful that more and more people are having serious discussions about this, because it's been happening for quite some time now. And it's really got its teeth into not corporate America, but the global corporate world, all of them. It's a big, big deal.
And you've mentioned that Larry Fink has said that he will only invest in certain corporations that have highest ESG scores. So
he's the CEO of BlackRock, for those that don't know.
Yeah, and so exactly what's happening here is he essentially signaling, being that BlackRock is like in partnership with the Federal Reserve. We learned that during the pandemic. Is he signaling that he will essentially, on behalf of this free line of credit that he's getting, invest in corporations that follow these certain agendas? Like, does it almost seems to me that, like, whereas in capitalism the consumer used to have the final say over what corporations do, now we are supplanting that with the Federal Reserve and effectively the companies that they fund.
Yeah, and federal policy too. Well, there's two important things to note here. First off, you're a great thing to mention to people is that, yes, it's not just the access to the Fed window that matters. It's the relationship therein that you profit off of tremendously. BlackRock was put in charge of doling out, I think it was all of the PPP loans during the pandemic, during lockdowns. Like, you don't get that unless you are a very favored business. You got to be like at the highest, like number one on the list if you're going to get that job. And I'm sure it was highly lucrative, no doubt about it. So that's one aspect of it. And two, Larry Fink doesn't actually manage. He doesn't actually have $10 trillion. He manages $10 trillion. The vast majority of that money is ours. It's pensioners, it's individual investors, it's just normal people to a large extent. But because you have now relied on them to manage your money, they get the voting rights. And the voting rights for shareholder meetings is what I'm referencing here. If Larry Fink gets to weigh in when they own, I think it's like north of 5% of 80% of all Fortune 500 companies. Well, this man is extraordinarily powerful. He's essentially like a plurality owner of almost every big business on earth at this point in terms of his voting rights. So that's why he feels like a god, and this is why he's able to implement his worldview in such a dramatic fashion. So much so that he sends out this annual letter to his shareholders as well as all businesses on the planet, where he says inside of it, if you don't go along with a focus must always be on carbon reduction. Like if you expect any BlackRock bucks, this is what you got to do. And he says it really explicitly. I encourage anybody to go out there and read his 2020, 2021, 2022 newsletters. They're not that long. It'll give you a real insight into how he instructs the less powerful, but still very, very powerful. Many of them are billion-dollar corporations to do what he says.
Yeah, and this kind of explains why like a lot of confusing things happen with business decisions like that end up. So like I think you mentioned in the past that Gillette and their decision to run that ad that lost them, I mean, I don't even remember the figure, but certainly like verifiably it lost them a crap ton of money. I think it was during the Super Bowl. It was a Super Bowl commercial where they were just like, they essentially trashed their entire consumer, just men. And they were pointing out toxic masculinity. And then another example for probably my listeners, being that I have a lot of people from Montana who are like blue collar workers and truckers, the GoFundMe example, where GoFundMe pulled the trucker protests donations that they earned.
Can I add one thing there?
Yeah, go ahead.
What's also important to realize is that the primary driver behind cancel culture, or getting businesses to go along with it, it's not even the businesses themselves, because like I don't think that GoFundMe really wants to do this. I don't think they want to take this path, but payment processors, which all rely on the Federal Reserve, have basically just all in unison said, if you don't have a cancel culture mentality, we will stop supporting you. This is I have evidence of this too. It's Give, Send, Go, which came in and supplanted GoFundMe in terms of offering these services, these fundraising services to these organizations which had been essentially blacklisted through GoFundMe. Well, then Give, Send, Go gets a call from PayPal and Visa and MasterCard and American Express, and they say, hey, we're not going to allow you to process payments if you guys don't also cancel these alleged fascists which are fighting for their fucking freedom in Canada. So it really does stem from Federal Reserve policy. I think that's the one thing that people, they struggle to believe it, but I am 100% convinced that it's not just Federal Reserve, but also federal government policy. Those are the two drivers behind all of this. And when we're talking about, big business, like the biggest businesses on the planet, and them doing all of this crazy stuff that their consumers despise, you have to realize like why. You have to ask yourself why. I'm giving you the answer. Why? This is why.
So do you know if the losses that they're making because of these poor decisions with marketing, is it made up by investments from BlackRock and all of this, or is it merely that they have enough control over the board that even if they're making losses and tearing apart their company, they're going to do it anyway, just because the Fed is essentially creating the metrics and profit isn't one of them?
Yeah, I mean, once again, it's the same two things I said before, where it's like you have some people that are on the board that are true believers. Many people, millions and millions of people believe that carbon is the most dangerous thing on the planet and that we're all going to die. So you have some people that are willing to sacrifice because they believe it in their soul. That's certainly part of it. But I think for the most part, when CEOs in particular of these businesses make these decisions that hurt their bottom line, what we don't see is the consequences if they don't proceed in this path. Because if your ESG score drops because now Gillette has been labeled some sexist business and BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard all divest themselves of your shares, well, then your market cap takes such a massive hit that you're saying to yourself, well, sure, I'm going to lose 20% of our consumers by taking this path, but I maintain my share value because otherwise I'm going to get my market cap dumped. So it's a gamble. You can't know for sure which is going to hurt you more, but I'm sure that the CEOs have to be quantifying this. They have to be sitting down with a calculator and their accountants and their attorneys and everybody else going like, all right, which path makes the most sense? And I think evidenced by the fact that almost all big business has gone woke, the calculus is that it benefits you to do so. And that is deeply problematic.
Yeah, and you mentioned before, I think another podcast, that states might actually be completely divested from by some of these
Yep.
investment companies. Do you think that explains why, like, states like California today just announced that they're going to try to get rid of all vehicles, I think new vehicles, by 2035 if they're not electric cars?
Oh, I didn't even hear that, but it doesn't surprise me. Yeah, I mean that's certainly part of it. I think also it's politically palatable in states like California because you have a bunch of lunatic lefties that think that like carbon's the greatest danger. So whatever, I already have a Tesla. Why shouldn't we vote for all of these poor people to also get one? Like that's their mindset. It's insane. But yes, that is certainly playing a role in how both Republican and Democrat governors respond to these things because they're trying to get, laws put on the books where ESG metrics are now important when it comes to state level decisions. So this is why I'm such a fan of what DeSantis is doing. He just came out last week and they are now divesting all of Florida's state pensions from any money manager that implements it via ESG guidance. That is enormous because that's hundreds
amazing.
of billions of dollars. Yeah, that's rad. And it's also not unlibertarian. Like that's the coolest thing about it is he's actually doing the right thing. He's just saying, hey, we're not going to have you deploy our capital in a way that's counter to our belief system. That's what you ought to do anyways. That's what everybody ought to be doing. So that gives me a lot of hope that there is both a greater risk of states being hurt by ESG, but the states that recognize it early enough are going to benefit tremendously. I think that the future of the economy in Florida, as long as DeSantis is in charge, is going to be like blindingly bright because I don't know if it's him or if it's his advisors or whoever, but whoever is rolling this stuff out, it's absolutely ingenious because there is so much pent up demand for anti-woke business practices that you will see a flood of corporations into Florida for that protection too. I think it's going to be a godsend for the people of Florida.
Are there any smaller money managers that are pushing back against this and trying to like compete with the larger ones? And I mean, how successful are they?
There's none that I'm aware of that have existed historically because this is a relatively new phenomenon in terms of like them actually explicitly stating this is what they're doing. We have an ESG fund. That's what we do. Although these funds go towards ESG stuff, which by the way is also a lie because it's only, I think, like 20, it's like half of the money that's in those funds has to be put towards ESG or something like that. Maybe it was 80%, 75%. I can't remember. I read it a long time ago. So that's also bullshit because if you genuinely believe that this is like the most important thing in the world, you're going to say, oh, obviously every dollar in here has to go towards ESG business. You can't have 20% go into oil and gas production. Like that's crazy. But that's how it works. So it's a fraud. Anyways, moving on. So as far as new competitors go, Vivek Ramaswamy, who's probably like he's the second most influential person on me in terms of like wrapping my head around this because I read his book a while ago. I think it was called Woke Inc. And he really he doesn't go deep enough, to be honest. Like you should probably just listen to my show if you want to go as deep as you need to understand this stuff because he's very much a moderate, and he's still a businessman. He's trying to like go along to get along to some extent. So he's not going to tell you the real truth about, the origin stories and things like that. But nonetheless, he does do a good job of highlighting many of the issues with it. And he's creating a competitor to all of the biggest money managers, and it's called Strive Capital Management. And they literally in September, so a week from now, they're going to be taking in funds for a ETF that is basically anti-woke, anti-ESG. So I'm rooting for him. We'll time will tell, because I think he's going to get very politically unfavorable treatment, and I would be surprised if he can succeed in the face of that. But there is a populist revolt against this stuff that is starting to blossom, thanks to people like James Lindsay, and we'll see. Time will tell.
So I was just thinking, like, often what you hear from people who promote ESG is that we should favor stakeholders instead of shareholders. But what you had mentioned earlier about how the Fed is essentially, and Larry Fink essentially has, the majority share over these companies and has somewhat of a say over how they control their business. It's not even that like there is any way for there to actually be like stakeholder capitalism. It's that there will be shareholders who try to represent stakeholders. So it's
all in scare quotes, like
right.
That they don't care, in my humble opinion, they don't care at all about, like, here's another example for you. Vanguard it was State Street. They had an investment in a company in Africa that there was terrible sexual assaults that were happening, like on the plantation. It was some sort of food production, and their response to that was not to fire and get the sexual assault people prosecuted. Their response was to build a statue across the street, not even across the street, but like 20 feet away, nose to nose with the bull on Wall Street. And it's this little girl, and it was like the brave girl or something is what it's called. And they're like, that's how they remedy both payment disparity between their male and female employees, as well as a bunch of sexual assault cases. Like, it's just bullshit. It's not actually alleviating any of the issues that the woke people care about, which is why the greenwashing thing is such a big deal, and why they need to realize that even if you believe that carbon emissions are this incredible existential threat, you're still not getting help here. This is still not going to give you what you want, not to mention all of the reasons you're wrong and you're going to starve to death because you're now cutting back on food production and you can't sustain life on this planet without it. Not to mention oil and gas, which allows for our entire economy to function, which means once again, you're going to starve to death. Not to mention you're going to have inflation because of it, which means you can't afford food, which means you starve to death. All of this amounts to you starving to death. So you're just stupid for believing this in the first place. But even if you believe it, even after I just explained all of that to you, still, it doesn't get done what you want to get done because these guys are just interested in crushing their competitors. That's really what this is about. It's just a mechanism for them to use their relationship with government to further oligopolize their position. That's what it is.
Yeah, and you had mentioned earlier that you think all of this is evil, and we've talked about this on Twitter, just in some Twitter threads before, where I've just asked a basic question, like, why shouldn't I regard all of these green policies as genocidal? Like, give me one reason why all of these policies shouldn't be regarded that way, considering that every single thing will result in genocide, essentially, in the third world. Like, if all of these are implemented globally, people will die.
Not just the third world either, brother. Like, you could see people freezing to death in Germany this winter. Like, this is imminent, man. And they're progressing very aggressively. They're shutting down the remaining nuclear power plants in Germany this year, while you're looking at in the face of, I think it was 700% increase in gas costs to heat your home. It's absolutely suicidal. This is the problem, is that so many of these people are true believers. They honestly believe that carbon is going to kill us. So they are sincerely willing to sacrifice incredible numbers of people, as well as just immense suffering for the rest of us. So I'm very nervous, man. I honestly, I can't give you one good reason to argue that these green policies aren't ultimately genocidal. I deeply believe that these people are Malthusians. They state it openly, all of them. They all say that the planet is overpopulated. All of them say that. Like the only reason I trust Elon Musk at all is because he's the one guy who's happens to be the richest man on the planet who's saying that this planet is terribly underpopulated and that we our growth rate is diminishing. We're about to have a population collapse. He's absolutely right. He is absolutely right. We will suffer unimaginably if we allow for, especially with our socialist model where we have all of these unfunded liabilities that you have to, the only way you can possibly sustain our financial system is to continue to have an increase in your population so that you have more young people that are paying more taxes to sustain the unfunded liabilities of the elderly as they retire. All of these countries are headed down the same path of depopulating and ultimately becoming insolvent. It is going to be a catastrophe that no one is prepared for. And very few people are even aware that it's coming. It's incredible to me. It's incredible to me that like just basic understanding of Austrian economics and human nature and history, and I'm able to predict, like look like I have a crystal ball. Like
Right.
I don't, but I promise you I'm right. Like you cannot continue on this path without immense human suffering. So it's up to the people to rise up and say, no more. You can't take us down this path any further. We are not willing to die for your, Malthusian belief system. It's insane.
Yeah, I had a professor who, I mean, his class had nothing to do with this. I'm not going to say which class it was because I don't want them to track him down and get in touch with him and say that I said this. But this professor just out of nowhere one time, he was talking about climate change, and then he goes, "Yeah, your generation is the first generation where I really have hope because our planet cannot currently sustain the population." And I was like, "Did you seriously just say that to like a whole auditorium of students?" Like I just don't understand what motivates it. And I guess that's just kind of what my question is like, do these World Economic Forum people, do they really want mass death? Is it possible that the secondary consequences of all of these policies, which would result in death, might actually be a primary motive? Or is it just that these people are like technocrats who think that their models are right, that they will be able to like save these people and provide green energy for these
Yeah.
people? I don't know.
Well, as with both California as well as the BlackRock analysis, it's the same thing. You have both. You have true believers that are technocrats that deeply believe in their intellectual superiority and they sincerely believe that their models are correct. And then you also have Malthusians that believe that the planet is overpopulated for whatever reasons that they can justify that. And then you also just have people that realize this is where the game's at. This is where the money funnel is leading. There's been enormous amounts of money to be made by following this ESG Ponzi scheme for the past couple of years. So it doesn't surprise me at all. It really doesn't surprise me that it's taken over. Once you understand all of the incentives, that's the main thing that economists and a lot of political analysts are terrible at, is just understanding human incentives. The incentive structures, and this is what's so brilliant about the people that created this ESG scam, was that they understood the incentives to get big business on board with this. So I think it's both. I think there are some people that really think that the planet is overpopulated, but I just want to emphasize they're wrong. That if you believe, like, there has been doomsday prognostication from people that believe the planet's overpopulated my entire life and much prior to that, for a very, very long time. And their predictions have always been wrong because they always underestimate human innovation. They never believe that we're going to find that new energy source, that new mechanism to, like, fracking. Fracking completely changed the entire concept behind whether or not we were running out of oil and gas. And it also made America, for a time, a net oil and gas exporter. Can you imagine? So they're just wrong. And the more people you have on the planet, the more brains you have working towards problem solving. It ultimately, like, quantifiably, you can just predict that if you have more people, you have, and you, like, say these problems are real, and there are obviously many sincere environmental issues, but the answer to that is not central planning. It's decentralization and population growth, allowing the incredible ingenuity that exists within, say, 1% of human beings to problem solve this stuff, and allowing the profit motive to solve these problems, because there is profit to be made. So it's It's very dangerous, man. If we allow the technocratic, top down control and problem solving to deal with this, like, just consider this for a second. If you think that this is an existential risk, who's the last fucking person on the planet that you would want in charge of it? Like Joe Biden and the Democrat Party? Like, no. Like, so even if you think that this is ultimately like the gravest risk that we face, which is nonsense because we're on the cusp of World War III, but assuming you believe that, you have to look at how government handled COVID, for God's sakes. Like, do you think that worked out? Like, do you think that if you give them all of the money and power and control, that they are going to eliminate carbon emissions? It's nonsense. It's never going to happen. It's never going to work. It's insane. It's an insane belief system on both fronts. So I'm just imploring people to wake up before it's too late.
Yeah, and this kind of gets to like the beauty of Austrian economics and like praxeology, and the idea that like humans are not things that you can just place on a model. They're not like this static force that like if you just like model out with all things being equal, all things being constant, that we will have a population bomb, as Paul Ehrlich put it in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Like no, humans adapt, and they have, and that's why we're at the top of the food chain. And like,
Yeah,
yeah, and I think
and
that
they
it's
and they
just,
respond they respond to incentives. I mean, look at what happens when you have a more affluent civilization. They stop reproducing. That's so like part of allowing capitalism to flourish alleviates your concerns about the population bomb or boom or whatever you want to call it. So it's like these people are just detached from reality, man. It's really crazy.
and it might actually get to like the Malthusian idea that like if you do think that humans are just things that can be inputted, like you can just input
Right.
them into a calculation, then they really are just numbers, and they're quantifiable, and there's nothing really valuable or like
Yep.
nothing behind them other than just like what the model represents.
Yeah, well, that's why I view these people as communo-fascists. Like they're really communists at their core because they believe in global governance. That's what's necessary. If you believe that carbon is going to kill us all, you have to have a global government. There's no other option, because I mean, the other option obviously is to innovate your way out of it, but from their worldview, that's an impossibility. So we only have the option of basically making a global government, which in that case, you can justify going to war with China because they're not reducing their emissions nearly as fast as we are. We've gone down significantly while they've like doubled and tripled. So yeah, I mean, it's the most dangerous worldview imaginable, and it is Malthusian. It just is.
Yeah, I'm wondering a little bit about the World Economic Forum, and if there's any like verifiable link that like Klaus Schwab has to ESG metrics, and if like
Oh yeah.
it's okay, so it's not just speculation that their interests align. It's like he is actually aligned with this and a part of it.
Oh yeah, I mean, the World Economic Forum is the primary mechanism by which they get the biggest money managers and biggest businesses on the planet together annually in Davos, where they all get up there and they kiss each other's asses and they talk about how great they're doing. But those well, I mean, I guess I do have to extrapolate a little bit and guess a little bit, but they have behind the doors meetings where they create deals between the biggest businesses with the governments to decide on how they're going to progress in eliminating carbon emissions and things like that. But they talk about it openly. I mean, Klaus Schwab sits. I mean, obviously he's the top of the World Economic Forum, but if you look at the board members of the World Economic Forum, it's like all of the money managers and all of the biggest businesses, and they go and they speak there. It's like this is not a stretch for people. Like I know it's hard to believe because it is such a massive conspiracy, but it's in the open. You can go research it yourself. Like it's absolutely true.
Yeah, and specifically with the World Economic Forum, do you think that it is also kind of the same exact thing where there's true believers, and then there's financial motivations as well, or do you think there's also some like um, nationalistic thing going on here? Because it seems like the World Economic Forum is against US hegemony, or at least I've heard that argument before, where it seems like everything is about taking down the dollar. Some people have even said that it's for European hegemony, but is it that they actually just want their own hegemony, and they want corporate interests to be at the top, or how
I
do
think
you
that
assess that?
Yeah, I think they just want, complete hegemonic rule, and these people are, supranational. They don't have allegiances to countries. They have allegiance to what I perceive to be a communist ideology. That, it's going to be this technocratic communist elite that believe that they know what's best for all of us idiot normies, and they're going to implement it however they have to. And they're the only reason that they work with the big governments of the world is because they realize, like, that's how they can use the force of the state to implement their will. It's brilliant. I mean, it's what you ought to do if you have uh intentions on global conquest. But no, I don't think it's about nationalism personally, but I mean, it has greatly enriched these people. I mean, they have benefited tremendously by this stuff because their relationship with the printing press is just so powerful. I mean, how could you possibly fail? You're gonna get rich. I mean, you're ultimately, they are going to fail because it's central planning, and the people will rise up. You're already seeing it. Sri Lanka just fell because of ESG. Denmark looks like it's about to have a revolution because of it, because they're trying to cut nitrogen use in fertilizer over there. And the farmers are realizing that, oh, you guys are going to put us all out of business. Like, we see the writing on the wall, and now they're rising up. Thank goodness, because the rest of us are going to starve if they don't. You see it in much of Latin America. You have revolutions that are popping off because of inflation and shortages of goods and things of that nature. It's They're going to fail, but in the meantime, they're going to get very, very rich.
Yeah, I saw Edward Snowden tweeted something like, for all of you people who are saying that you won't eat the bugs, like, you definitely are, because they're just going to put them in the food. And I think that this is the ESG is exactly how they will do it if they are able to accomplish
Yeah,
it
yeah,
before they fall, is because
100%.
there's going to be incentives behind the scenes saying, if you want investments, you've got to, in the
Yep.
name of climate change, you've got to put bugs in the food, and replace red meat with bugs.
And the government will give them some sort of pass to not declare, or to obfuscate with some Orwellian phraseology as to what they're actually putting in the food. It would be like, now green friendly burgers,
Yep.
like whatever the fuck. It's good. I mean, it's going to be for those in the know, it's going to be gaslighting to the extreme, but they'll downplay it, and all of a sudden you'll be eating burgers that are 60% cricket, and you'll be like, how did this happen? um I don't think we'll get there, honestly. I think that this will implode before that. That's my estimation. I could totally be wrong, obviously. But I think that the economic malfeasance is so stark and so severe at this point that we will have major economic upheaval and ultimately civilization turmoil in the near term that will prevent us from getting anywhere near their end goal. I mean, God willing, we'll see.
We talked about this last time, but do you foresee them trying to implement a digital currency before that, as like their last Hail Mary?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, honestly, I think that there's a good chance that that's why they reopened, like why they stopped the lockdowns, because they realized that we were going to have a complete economic implosion, um, and they weren't ready for the CBDC yet. So, like, I'm putting on my evil totalitarian devil hat to try and just evaluate this stuff. Like, what would I do? Like, if I knew that the people were about to rise up, what would I do? I would kick the can. I would use the central banks to kick the can, delay the day of reckoning economically, so that I could further study and implement the central bank digital currency. It makes perfect sense to me. So I think that as much of technocratic idiots and true believers many of these people are, there has to be some advisors in their ranks that are saying, look, the track that we're on is going to end up in revolution. So we have to have the CBDC ready so that we can then implement universal basic income, which will subdue the vast majority of the masses, because they will realize, like, this is the only way I can eat. So I'm not going to rise up, because otherwise my bank account will be shut down. So I think that's their intention, but I hope that enough people realize how perilous the central bank digital currency will be that they'll reject it outright. But if they're poor and they're starving, and their only mechanism to get food is accepting both UBI and CBDC, well, then all bets are off.
Yeah, I think it will fundamentally come down to states like Florida and hopefully Montana,
Yeah.
just nullifying this to whatever extent possible. Like, I my high school civics teacher who got me into libertarianism, he just got elected at the legislature in Montana, and he's like, I mean, I don't know if he would call himself this, but he's like a Rothbardian. Like, he listened to Tom
Hell yeah.
Woods and everything like that. And we've talked about, implementing uh, like repealing legal tender laws, or perhaps rerouting federal taxes to the state treasury, different things like that, that can hopefully just put a stop to this before.
Yeah.
And also other things like defend the guard, like the Montana legislature and the Libertarian Party are going to propose that, and
Yep.
hopefully
That
things like that will just take the empire down.
Yeah, well, I think that that's what's going to happen. Actually, is that as the empire is collapsing, which by the way, it's collapsing right now. Like, I really believe that that's what we're experiencing. That's why everything feels so messed up. It's because, like, our stranglehold of global power is now very tenuous at best, and it's just like you can feel it. So I think that's what we're experiencing. And as we kind of have our USSR moment where our currency and our economy just eats shit, that's where you'll see the truly dissident political leaders, probably on the right wing. Almost all of them will be on the right wing, of course. Will start to work towards, peaceful secession, if it's not formal but informal. I think, Florida, Tennessee, Texas, maybe. Um, like you said, Montana, and obviously New Hampshire. I think that we're going to have, probably 6 or 7 like safe spaces to use SJW language.
Yeah, am wondering what you think about how you view the Russia-Ukraine conflict through this lens. Whether it's like the beginning of the war and why it started, if you think that that's tied to it at all, or if you think like Russia moving away from the dollar is connected to this at all. Do you think that the conflict
Yeah.
fundamentally is tied to this issue, or do you think that there's like the conflict itself was going to happen, um, but there just happens to be some relations, I guess, on the periphery?
I mean, there's no doubt it plays a role. Like, of course, it plays a role. The number one import, or excuse me, export for Russia, basically, like the primary driver for their economy is oil and gas. That is very counter to the true believer ESG people. So there's no doubt that they want to punish them for that. But then you look at their relationship with countries like Saudi Arabia, very positive. So that doesn't explain it entirely. There's obviously, geopolitical reasoning that we'll never know the truth about, but we can only hypothesize on. I think that there's a lot to be said for, wanting to pin down the two biggest threats, which is China and Russia, from their worldview. I don't think that it should be this way, but that's how our leadership views it, the liberal world order. So um, I think that it's a dual front, or a, dual purpose war, and there's no doubt that the U.S. involvement in Ukraine was the catalyst for all this, as well as NATO, obviously. So I think that they wanted it and they got it, and let's just pray we survive it.
Yeah, it almost seems like there might be even three interests where some people are trying to defend the US dollar here, and that's why they're partnering with Saudi Arabia. But then like
Yeah,
WEF people are like, well, we can take advantage of this, and we can take down both Russia and the US. I don't
yeah.
know.
No, I think you're right. I mean, that's another, as weird as it sounds, white pill in all this, is that there are different sects that are trying to, implement their will and work towards some sort of global dominance. China is also a competing interest that is trying to have some level of at least global autonomy, if not global dominance themselves. So yes, the fact that Putin, his he was already working towards exiting the U.S. dollar, and the fact that he made the ruble backed by gold to some extent during the early days of the invasion when all the sanctions hit. Like, he knows what time it is. He knows what this game is. It's like, this is about defending the dollar and its utilization of it in trade as the global reserve currency. Like, there's no doubt that always plays a role in all of our militarism, but it's more complicated than that too.
Yeah, I just to kind of finish up here, I am wondering if you think that there are any leftists out there that are waking up to this. I mean, it does seem like our interests kind of converge, where their definition of fascism, if there's like a Venn diagram, it's like what all corporatism and all things that we would consider fascism, like corporate government interests converging, like they consider that fascist too. It's just that they also kind of put in free market uh,
Right.
economics as fascism too. So like
Yes, they do.
in a sense, we can partner on this issue, and I wonder if you see any leftists waking up to this.
Yeah, I mean they are, but the problem is that their solutions are going to be counter to our interests, because they're going to want to nationalize big business, like that, and that's what we're fighting against, is that these businesses have already been nationalized, if not, globally nationalized or globally owned. I don't even know what to call that. So I don't know that there's a coalition to be found there. I'd have to give that more thought. I certainly, you know, pushing back against the fraud that is ESG. Like we could do that together, but we're going to end up fighting each other at the end because they are still true believers to a large extent in carbon reduction schemes and things like that, and carbon taxes and all this other stuff that we would absolutely despise. So I don't know. It would be a challenge, but I would certainly just encourage people on the left and right to realize that you are under existential threat, and it has nothing to do with carbon, but rather the lie of trying to eliminate carbon production at all costs. Like it's going to, whatever evils you think it's going to present, it'll be 1,000 times worse in reality if you allow global government schemes to try and alleviate it. So I hope that some people on the left that ultimately care about climate change because they think it's going to affect the poor and minority class the worst. Like I'm telling you, your belief about saving one life when it came to lockdowns is the reason that you now see revolts all over the world and inflation skyrocketing, and you have starvation that's now rampant. Like your belief system in your faith in this technocratic elite that have this ingenious capacity to remedy all that ails is flawed deeply. You need to reevaluate your priors. You need to look in your soul and say, do I bear responsibility for the human suffering that's existing on the planet today that I claimed or I believe sincerely was going to assist the poor and the minority classes? Like, because if you can do that, then you might be able to be reached. Um, Time will tell if they'll actually be reached. I don't know.
Yeah, just as a last question here, I'm wondering if you have any advice for people who might want to leave the financial system, or at least like safeguard themselves from it. And then also, um, just if you have any like call to action or anything, what you think people should be doing, like what should the average person be doing in their states, and yeah, what can we
Yeah.
do to help?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly I think diversifying your personal portfolio so that you have hard assets in case the governments do decide to allow the dollar to go bust and migrate to a CBDC. You're going to need hard assets to weather that. But hard assets, I do not mean housing necessarily. I think housing is already tipping over, as I've been predicting for a couple of years now, and it's finally happening. You're seeing price cuts and inventory increases. So I think that 2023 will be a very rough year for housing. So I would not encourage you to use housing as an inflation hedge. Personally, I could be wrong, obviously, because the Fed could, revert on their plan to continue with the interest rate hikes. In which case, all bets are off. We could enter a hyperinflationary phase. I really don't know, but I think that if you haven't diversified into cryptocurrencies, into precious metals, into and also having the capacity to produce your own food and things of that nature, be more self-sustaining, be less reliant on the banking system, be less reliant on the supply chain. Like those are all things that you can do in your personal life. As far as what you can do politically, make sure that you only vote for people that actually understand this stuff, and there's very few of them. So I think that would be a great campaign if someone wanted to just go around and educate the new political class, the people that are like the America First types. I don't think they understand this stuff, not even close to as deeply as I do, and I don't understand it as deeply as I would like to. So those people need to be reached. Like if you're going to have any hope of there being political solutions to this, you need both federal level representatives that can slow down this behemoth, but most importantly, state level politicians and hopefully governors that can really fight back, because you're going to need them to fight back to save your people in your state. So I think that that would probably be the best best advice I could give on the political level. And then obviously, if you have any political leanings and you have the capacity to get into public office, if it's even on a city council or something, to try and, because this issue exists at city council levels. I want people to understand that, like, it is pervasive. It's almost everywhere now. Maybe not in your red state, but trust me. I was in Carlsbad, like in California near San Diego, and it's like my city council was, so woke. They were voting on, basically banning all new construction, which obviously hurts the poor the most, because then they can't get into housing. It makes housing skyrocket in value. But simultaneously they were, actively voting to stop, harassing the homeless that were overtaking the city there too. So like when you look at cities and states that are just being overran with homelessness and drug addiction and things like that, like there is an ESG component with that stuff too. So it's whatever level you can fight it, you got to fight it.
Yeah, I really think that that's the hope, is that there's I mean, there is almost like this populist revolt going on at local levels, like especially in red states like Montana. It's almost like every single person you talk to who is politically aware and like slightly to the right seems to at least be tapped into, whether it's conspiracies that are motivating it, like they're at least aware that something weird is going on, and people are
Yeah.
trying to resort back to like localism. And I mean, even during the last legislative session here in Montana, someone proposed a bill that would have nullified the USDA and like allowed people to process beef locally without having
That
to
would be
go through.
incredible.
Exactly, without having to go through like the major processing plants. We could just do it here.
Yeah.
And they did get some changes, like people can trade, I think, raw milk now without anything like that. um
That's huge.
so I think it's just encouraging those people to go further. And I mean, the biggest concern for a lot of these people is they're going to lose federal funding. But I mean,
Yep.
my argument is like, I'd much rather have a sustainable economy that is prosperous here, where we're actually eating quality food that isn't being
Yeah.
impacted by ESG policies.
No, totally, man. I had Texas Slim on my show. Unfortunately, his audio was screwed up, so I had to put it on my locals exclusively because it just wasn't high enough quality. But the guy's doing incredible work with the beef initiative. He's really drawing attention to all of this, the oligopoly that exists within the meat processing plants. That's basically making it, impossible for the small cattle producers, as well as, any sort of competitors, to rise up in the processing arena. It's terribly dangerous, and it's, in my opinion, 100% intentional. If you control people's food supply, you can do whatever you want to them. Yes, I do sound like a conspiracy theorist to say it. No, I don't care. That's my belief. I believe that's what they're doing. So um, I think it's really important that, even if you want to take a longer time horizon solution mindset, then, get involved with your school council. Make sure that the curriculum for these kids is getting rid of this incredible, like, you're having so many young people that have these terrible anxiety disorders. A big part of that is the fact that they all believe the world's going to end in 10 years. That's not healthy to have your child in elementary school being told that your very existence is the reason we're all going to die. Like, it's totally crazy, and it's wrong, I might add. So I really hope that, whatever minor difference you can make. Obviously, you can homeschool your kids. You can do a lot of things. I mean, you can do a lot of things, but just like whatever you can do in your day-to-day life, talk to people about this, be honest about it, be open with it, share this episode, whatever it takes, just like whatever little bit you can do. We all do a little bit. All of a sudden, we've done a big bit.
Yeah, well, I would just recommend everyone share this episode, like you said, give it a like. Also, remember to subscribe, and I'll link to our previous podcast so people can watch that too, where we
Perfect.
talked a little bit more about the fundamentals in the economy right now. But yeah, if you want to just let people know where they can find you and find your
Sure.
podcast, please do, and then let you go.
It's at Liberty Lockpod on Twitter. I'm 700 away from 50K, so make sure you follow me there before I get nuked. I'd really appreciate it. That'd be quite the milestone. And then if you want to, follow the show, just search Liberty Lockdown on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all over the place. I am at 125,000 downloads in the past 30 days, which is incredible. That's a new record for me. Tomorrow I will be having Dave Smith back on the show, so that's always amazing. And then September 4th, I will be having a debate on Trump's legacy between Dave Smith and Styx Hexenhammer 666. They're both incredible debaters, so it's going to be probably the biggest episode I've ever done. I will be the moderator, which is insane because I suck at moderating because I'm way too opinionated, but it will be on Liberty Lockdown. Make sure you guys subscribe to Liberty Lockdown on YouTube and wherever your podcatchers are at so that you don't miss it, because it is going to be enormous. It's going to be fireworks. I cannot wait. Beyond that, Tower Gang or whatever. Who cares?
Dude, I was gonna say when you mentioned that about Twitter, James Lindsay got banned. You have to like resist all the temptation of the Tower Gang people because you have to stay on Twitter.
I do, bro. Believe me, I'm like the only one. I'm literally the only one left,
right.
So I have no choice. I have no choice just to try and be our marketing arm. Is like I have to be very, very cautious. It's funny because I still go very hard, but I just make sure I don't make any off-color jokes for the most part, and I just kind of keep it in my lane, like right up to the line, but not over. And we'll hope I can stay on there for a while, because obviously it really does help get my message out there. I just got followed by God, I forgot his name all of a sudden. Who's the guy that replaced Rush Limbaugh on the radio? Super bass.
Let me look this up. It's not.
I'll tell you.
Clay Travis?
No, it's not him. It is Jesse Kelly.
Oh, that's right. Oh, and yeah, I mean his post the other day about saying sorry to all the Ron Paul people, that was huge.
Yeah, it was actually it wasn't my reply on that where I said, okay, we appreciate it, now let's abolish the FBI too, and he responded yes, and everyone was like, yeah, this is awesome. But it was actually a joke I made. He posted a video of this dude calling because his right of way was being messed with by a bunch of people on bicycles, and he kept going, you granola eating assholes. Saying that to him. And I said, put this guy in charge of homeless encampment cleanups, problem solved in 30 days. That's what got Jesse Kelly to follow me, which is totally hilarious. Awesome. But obviously he's got a huge audience. Millions of people listen to him every week because he replaced Rush Limbaugh. It's like probably the biggest radio show out there. So I'm just very grateful to still have the platform I do, that I can reach and slowly allow our radical libertarian ideology to kind of infiltrate the ether. And it is working, man.
It really is.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it, and we'll have to do it again.
Yeah, anytime, brother.